didn't make us kings. Dragons did. Little did Daemon know when he said these words out loud that he was rejecting the entire basis of his house's continued existence. Daenys the Dreamer's dream saved the Targaryens from the doom. Aegon the Conqueror's dream forged the Iron Throne, and while we don't have any confirmation of this, it's possible that Aegon's granddaughter Rhaena dreamed dragon dreams as well, for she named her dragon Dreamfyre. In House of the Dragon, this she-dragon has been alive for close to a century, and is one of the largest in the world, but sadly, we won't see her come into play until the very end. Still, a dragon is a dragon, and dissecting their anatomies is our sacred duty. So without further ado, let's dive into the unique history and physiology of Dreamfire. And spoiler warning, because there will be a few of those scattered throughout the video. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Birthing and bonding. Dreamfire and her dreamer princess. You would have noticed that we called Dreamfire close to a century old, and not exactly a century. That's because we don't know the exact date of her birth, only that she was born during Aegon's reign. But considering who claims Dreamfire and how, we can guess how old she is. Rhaena Targaryen, her first rider, was born in 23 AC. At that time, there were only 5 Targaryens in the royal household, including Rhaena. We had Aegon himself, his sister wife Visenya, and his sons Aenys and Maegor. Of these 4, 3 had dragons of their own. Aegon had Balerion, Visenya had Vhagar, and Aenys had Quicksilver. Maegor was old enough to claim a dragon of his own, but he decided to wait until his father's passing, for he wanted the Black Dread himself. At the time of Rhaena's birth, there must have been many hatchlings on Dragonstone, but she wasn't presented with one soon after, unlike her father. Aegon and his sisters were said to have claimed dragons shortly before they launched their war, and Aenys was only given Quicksilver because it was believed to be the last resort to improving his health. It appears as though the Valyrians used dragon claiming as a rite of passage, for when a man or a woman came of age. Aegon and his sisters must have followed that tradition as the last Targaryen lords, but when they became the first Targaryen monarchs, dragons became an even bigger necessity. Aegon always traveled the 7 kingdoms with Balerion by his side, because his new subjects needed to be reminded that the Targaryens were here to stay, constantly. The best way to do that was to give each of his descendants a dragon of their own, and so when she was 9 years old, Rhaena was presented with a pale blue hatchling that had a silver crest and markings. In 3 years' time, that hatchling had grown large enough to ride, and Rhaena had named her Dreamfire. Based on this information, we estimate that Dreamfire's egg hatched a few weeks or months before Rhaena turned 9, and at best a year. We know that dragons outgrow their hatchling phase rather quickly, provided they receive ample freedom of movement and food. Daenerys' 3 dragons reach flying size within 3 years, especially Drogon, and that seems to be the case for Rhaena and Dreamfire as well. So if Dreamfire was indeed hatched in 32 AC, then she would be just shy of her 100th name day by the time the dance breaks out. In Fire and Blood, the Targaryen Civil War begins in the year 129, and goes on for 2 years. The latter half of her life will be addressed in due course, but the former half of her life wasn't entirely uneventful. On her 16th name day, Rhaena declared she was free to fly wherever she wanted. Dreamfire was spotted at Harrenhal, Gulltown, Tarth, and Runestone. Rhaena visited 3 of the 7 kingdoms 7 years after claiming her dragon. Dreamfire was fairly big by this point, definitively large enough to ride, and probably thrice the size of Drogon at the end of a Dance of Dragons. But she wouldn't get to taste war just yet on account of her size. Dreamfire size and fighting potential. The rebellion era to the dance. When Rhaena turned 18, she was wedded to her younger brother Aegon, keeping in line with the Targaryen and Valyrian custom. The royal court had approved of the marriage, but the rest of the realm did not. Many of the Targaryens' new subjects followed the faith of the 7, and this religion perceived incest as being the highest form of sexual sin. When Rhaena and Aegon made their first progress through the 7 kingdoms, they were hassled everywhere they went, and at one point Rhaena had to threaten their hasslers with dragonfire. Now, you might be asking how these people became emboldened enough to pull off something like this with the royal couple, much less a dragon rider. Well, the simple answer is, Rhaena didn't have Dreamfire with her. Her brother Aegon, though 15 at the time, had not yet claimed a dragon of his own, and this could be more evidence of that rite of passage we were talking about earlier. Sure, the hatcheries of Dragonstone must have had a hatchling or even a young dragon docile enough for the prince to claim for his own, but for some reason he waited. Aegon had gone flying on Dreamfire's back many a time, and his younger siblings Jaehaerys and Alysanne received their eggs in their cradle, but he remained dragonless for most of his life. Because his son and heir did not have a dragon, King Aenys forbade Rhaena from taking hers with them, for he did not want his son to be seen as weak. But this was weak King Aenys' latest blunder, for if he'd allowed Dreamfire to accompany his children, a rebellion could have been contained, and they wouldn't have had to fend for their lives. When Rhaena and Aegon's progress reached Crake-Hall, thousands of poor fellows besieged the castle, but one look at Dreamfire would have dissuaded any such attacks. Though she wasn't quite the largest dragon in the world, she was big enough to hold her own in a battle, especially if other dragons weren't involved. In later years, many lords would eye her with lustful eyes, and some would even try to buy her children. We think it's safe to say that had Helaena had Dreamfire, Maegor's usurpation could have been avoided, for she would have either burnt the besiegers to death or flew to Dragonstone with her brother by her side. Because she didn't, the pair were forced to spend the first few years of Maegor's tyranny holed up at Casterly Rock. Dreamfire was rescued from King's Landing when Aegon and Rhaena snuck into the city during Maegor's half-year occupation of Old Town. She was present at Pink Maiden Castle when Aegon raised his banners and gathered an army, but curiously, she wasn't involved in the battles that followed. Dreamfire was a slender dragon, likely belonging to the speed-type species, but she was said to be smaller than Quicksilver. Quicksilver himself was only a quarter of the size of Balerion, who at this time had been claimed by Maegor. Historians argue as to whether Aegon commanded Rhaena to stay back with her dragon or whether it was her own call, but we think it was the former. Rhaena Targaryen had proven herself to be a fierce and independent noble woman in her youth. Even during their progress, she wasn't hesitant to use her dragon's power to subdue her future subjects. Sure, Dreamfire and Quicksilver put together would probably not even reach half of Balerion's size, but 2 dragons are better than 1, and as Rook's Rest taught us, there's more than one way to kill a dragon. Dreamfire and Quicksilver together would have stood a much better chance at defeating Maegor and Balerion, but Rhaena stayed back and her husband died because of his youth and inexperience. Over the years, she would grow in size immensely, but never be ridden into war, though there were a few opportunities. In 48 AC, Rhaena escapes Maegor's clutches and joins her brother Jaehaerys in opposing him. She flies off on Dreamfire and returns to the Red Keep, threatening fire and blood, but luckily there's no need for that. In 54 AC, she has 2 reasons to go to war with her dragon, but neither come to pass, for Rhaena keeps herself restrained. The first was betrayal. Her constant companion and rumored lover Elissa Farman had disappeared from her household, and so had 3 dragon eggs. Rhaena flew to King's Landing to inform her brother about this, and the king warned her that they might have to go to war over it someday with their dragons. Rhaena was said to have compared herself to Visenya Targaryen just then. The second reason was also a loss, but this one was more personal, as it was Rhaena's mother who passed away. Alyssa Valerian was old and well past childbearing age, but her second husband, Rhaegar Baratheon, got her with child anyway, and she died giving birth to a young girl. Rhaena arrived at Storm's End and threatened to turn it into a second Harrenhal, if Rhaegar even thought of sullying her mother's memory. The Lord of Storm's End laughed her threats away, but by this point, Dreamfire was the largest active Targaryen dragon barring Vhagar. Balerion would enter a stage of retirement after his flight to Valyria, and Vermithor and Silverwing were younger than Dreamfire. The Bronze Fury is said to have outgrown her quickly, probably because it was a war-type dragon, and well exposed to nourishment and war as the king's steed. After that, Dreamfire became the 3rd largest Targaryen dragon in existence, and she retains that status till this day. You guys saw that scene from Season 1 where Aemon tried to claim her. She's at least as large as Meleys or Caraxes, and if our theories are right, she's probably larger. Dragon scales are said to become more impervious to attack with age, and their flames hotter. Because she never really fought in a fight, Dreamfire is inexperienced with battle, but she's pretty used to long and arduous flights, for her and Rhaena once covered pretty much all of Westeros in about a year and a half. She's also in pristine condition, and has had the least amount of injuries of all the older dragons from the series. She's accustomed to being bonded with a willful and fiery rider for a very long period of time, as Rhaena and Dreamfire spent nearly 40 years together. After her death, her dragon made its lair in the Dragon Pit. This is probably what contributed to Dreamfire's growth stunting, as she shouldn't have been outsized by Vermithor as easily as she was. She also spent 4 to 5 decades in the Dragon Pit before she was claimed by Helaena, but she was easily one of the largest pit dragons of all time. At the start of the dance, Dreamfire was likely as large as Caraxes and Meleys, if not larger. She's only described as being smaller than Vermithor, so it's possible that Vermithor, Sheepstealer, and Vhagar will be the only dragons larger than her. Helaena doesn't have the nature of a warrior, but her show self seems to be handling the blood and cheese ordeal far better than her book self. At least she hasn't been driven mad by grief. Her nature wouldn't allow her to hurt a fly, but if she wanted to, she could use Dreamfire to further increase the strength of the Greens. Dreamfire is larger and stronger than most of Rhaenyra's dragons, including Syrax. The only dragon bigger than her under their command right now is Caraxes, and he's in no rush to reinforce his allies. 3 others will join Team Black soon enough, but she should be able to hold herself against at least two of them, those being Sheepstealer and Silverwing. The Greens are operating under the assumption that she'll be persona non grata in the actual war itself, but if that were not to be the case, Dreamfire would be a game changer. Helaena seems far more composed than Aegon in times of stress, and we can definitely say that she wouldn't have been as stupid as him if she were flying into the Battle of Rook's Rest. But Dreamfire has changed the game in other ways, chief of which is the fact that she's likely the mother of most of the dragons we see today. The Mother of Dragons, the first confirmed egg-laying dragon. We know that dragons are born from dragon eggs, and that dragon eggs are laid by she-dragons, but for a long time, there's been a debate around the exact nature of dragon sexes. Many maesters think that dragons, like most creatures, are born with definite sexes, but Sept and Barth claim that dragons are like flames, and their sex is indeterminable, for they can switch between male and female. This phenomenon is not uncommon in nature. Certain species of fish, like clownfish and hawkfish, exhibit male to female sex change when the female of a group dies. Frogs have been known to change sexes, and grow fully functional reproductive organs opposite of their birth sexes for a long time in labs. But now this phenomenon has been recorded in the wild as well. If Barth's assertion is true, then most dragons can do the same, depending on the availability of mates. If the male population dwindles, then females switch to males, and vice versa. Also considering the presence of the cannibal of Dragonstone, many dragons might not have even made it past their hatchling phase, which makes this ability all the more important. Once a dragon couple is bonded, they seem to mate for life. For instance, Vermithor and Silverwing are often said to be a couple, for they would often coil with one another, which we can only take as a euphemism for dragon coitus. We've never heard of Silverwing laying an egg in the books, but we're sure she did once she was old enough. Dreamfire laid her first clutch of eggs when Silverwing was 9, however, and besides, it would be extremely concerning if Vermithor was impregnating her at that age. Rhaena's dragon had already lain its first 2 clutches of eggs by the time her daughters were born at Casterly Rock. We don't know what the fate of these dragons was, or who the father was, or whether dragons are actually hermaphrodites and can reproduce without needing a partner. That last bit would be consistent with the taboo nature of Valyrian magic, but it's merely speculation at this point, and we have some evidence as to how dragon mating occurs. Go check out our Tessarian video for more on that. Dreamfire also laid a clutch of eggs between 49 to 50 AC, and this clutch of 300 hatched in 51 AC, when she was settled at Dragonstone. We don't know what happened to these dragons either, but judging by the timeline, one of them could have grown up to become Sheepstealer, who was said to have been born when the old king was young. 51 AC was literally a year into Jaehaerys' official reign, so the timeline should match. A more interesting prospect crops up 3 years after Rhaena's arrival on Dragonstone, when Alyssa Farman escapes with those dragon eggs we mentioned earlier. It's said that Alyssa sold those dragon eggs to the Sea Lord of Braavos, in exchange for enough gold to create her dream ship. A few years later, Sept and Barth arrived at the city and attempted to take them back, but the Sea Lord claimed he didn't have them, and in the end, the Iron Bank ended up forgiving the Iron Throne's debt. There's a theory that the Sea Lord lied, and that his dragon eggs eventually found their way into the hands of Illyrio Mopatis, who gave them to Daenerys Targaryen. This theory is built upon the fact that in his youth, Illyrio was a bravo and a thief, who was aligned with Varys. Bravos are the primary kind of fighters found in the free city of Braavos. They're ingrained into the city's culture, and it's made evident by Arya's stay there. The idea is that Illyrio was born in Braavos, and through his association with Varys, somehow managed to either steal or buy those dragon eggs they acquired some 2.5 centuries ago. That would explain why Dany's eggs were fossilized when she got them, and why Braavos and the Iron Throne never went to war. Those eggs became defunct away from Dragonstone. Illyrio has pretty much lied to Daenerys about everything since he met her, and in the books, he's even raised a rival claimant to her throne in complete secrecy. It wouldn't be above him to pass off dragon eggs he stole from Braavos as relics from the Shadowlands beyond Asshai. And if that's true, then Dreamfire is the mother of Drogon, Viserion, and Rhaegal. But then again, Illyrio is so rich that he doesn't need to do that kind of thing. He's rich enough to bankroll the entire Golden Company invasion by himself, and the Golden Company is the most expensive mercenary company in Essos. He could have just as easily purchased those dragon eggs from one of his friends across the Jade Sea. And besides, the first Book of Thrones went really hard on Asshai being the origin of all dragons. Even Euron Greyjoy claimed to have had a dragon egg at one point, and while he'd tell you he got it from Valyria, he likely got it at Asshai as well. So the Dreamfire is Drogon's mommy theory is cool, but we don't know how accurate it is. Also, Alyssa is said to have stolen the eggs from the hatcheries, whereas Rhaena kept Dreamfire in the Dragon Yards, away from Dragonmont. If she'd mated with someone in that time period, it would have surely been recorded, but she clearly didn't. Despite all that, we have to admit that Dreamfire is one of 2 dragons from the show that are confirmed egg layers, the other being Syrax, whose eggs have just been sent to the Vale. She's the literal mother of dragons, and also proof twice over that the dragon bond is real and symbiotic. how Dreamfire proved the Dragon Bond's power and the biggest missed opportunity. The interesting thing about Dreamfire is that she's only had 2 riders in her lifetime, but both of them have eerily similar personalities. Helena's childhood, as recorded in Fire and Blood, is pretty similar to that of Helaena. It's said that Helaena was a quiet and shy child that preferred the company of animals to people. She would often hide behind her parents when someone new approached her, and she never took to her attendance. The same can be said for Helaena, who spent most of her childhood collecting critters and bugs. Helena's condition is clearly because she's a dreamer. She often speaks of things that will happen in the future, and the showrunners have said that her sense of perception itself is rather different from normal people. But it's true that she became a tad more normal after she bonded with Dreamfire, and the dragon could have been given this name because Helaena was a dragon dreamer herself. It's said that after she claimed her dragon, Helena's shyness died out. Over the years, she grew bolder and fiercer, and the only time she reverted to her childhood sadness was when she was separated from her dragon during a progress with her father. With Dreamfire, Helaena grew stronger in spirit and will, eventually becoming a second incarnation of Visenya herself. It's hard to imagine that the girl that wouldn't even talk to strangers would threaten to burn the Lord of Storm's End with her dragon one day. But Helaena does it, and it's presumably because Dreamfire gives her the strength to do so. There are hints in the books that the Dragon Bond links rider and mount on a spiritual level. As we mentioned at the beginning of the video, King Aenys was a rather sickly child. In the first year of his life, it was believed he would die. It was only after he bonded with the hatchling that his health improved. When Jaehaerys' daughter Daenerys caught the shivers, the old king realized that she needed a dragon to bond with rather late into her treatment regimen. His next child received the dragon in the cradle, and later all 3 of his eldest surviving children would become dragon riders. It's possible that Helaena claimed Dreamfire because she had a vision of Helaena being her first rider, and saw in her a kindred spirit. Fire and Blood tells us that the princess loved nothing more than flying her dragon, and her mental health takes a dive only after Jaehaerys' assassination. Helaena also agreed with the Green's plan and encouraged Aegon to take the throne, something that doesn't happen in House of the Dragon. Martin himself has admitted that the show improved on book Helaena by making her a dreamer and adding more depth to her character. The book tells us that she went insane because she chose to give up her second son Maelor and unreliable as a dragon rider, but the show has portrayed Helaena as a pacifist. She even manages to empathize with the small folk that nearly swarm and kill her, because she understands that small folk lose children every day. Besides, Rhaenyra likes Helaena the most of all her half-siblings, and she wouldn't be capable of doing half the things Fire and Blood says she does to her. Yet the Queen's death is what we want to focus on here, for it did something rather unexpected. In the books, we're told that when Helaena dies, Dreamfire's roars are heard across King's Landing. Septon Barth tells us that she became incensed and tried to take flight, breaking 2 of her many heavy manacles. Barth believed that it was because the dragon could sense its rider's death. And we'll do you one better. Not only can dragons potentially feel their rider's deaths, they can also tell when it isn't natural. Think back to when Daemon took an arrow during the Stepstones War. Caraxes screamed in pain, mimicking his rider's feelings, though Daemon wasn't even gravely injured. Something like death would make that response worse, and this is perhaps why Dreamfire becomes the last Targaryen dragon to rain fire and blood on King's Landing. Toward the end of the series, all dragons will die, but not all of them will be killed by other dragons. The dragon pit will be invaded by a mob led by a zealot that preaches the dragons will be the death of the people, and thus they must be killed first. This is the second time Dreamfire faces such a situation, the first being at Fair Isle. But there, she was able to escape, thanks to Rhaena's good sense. In the dragon pit, she was chained down, and by the time she got free, there was no escape. Dreamfire kills waves upon waves of her would-be killers, but more and more keep replacing them until she's overwhelmed. She tries to fly out of the pit, cracking and collapsing its dome, but with that, she dies herself. Despite being one of the strongest dragons, Dreamfire never fights until the end, but when she does, boy will it be a sight to behold. Marvelous verdict. As for this video, that's all we've got for you folks. Let us know what you think in the comments below, and we'll see you soon enough. Until next time, don't forget, history is written in fire and blood. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.